and welcome to the 9050 podcast. I'm Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
If you live in the 905 region, there's a good chance that you live relatively close to a gravel quarry, and there's a good chance that the existence of the quarry is or has been controversial. Aggregates, to give them their proper name, are one of the constituent ingredients in, well, a huge number of things. Highway building and development of all kinds are two of the main ones, for concrete and cement needed for walls, foundations, sewers, drains, asphalt, paving slabs. The list could go on. And there's a good chance that if you have a backyard or even just a small balcony with a few plants, you've bought stone or gravel or sand extracted from an open cast mine that was previously either high quality farmland or perhaps even untouched Canadian forest. The most sought after locations for aggregates extraction can also be some of Ontario's most fragile and important ecological locations, for instance on the lands of the UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve in Niagara Escarpment. Groups like CORE, Conserve Our Rural Ecosystems, and PEARL, Protecting Escarpment Rural Lands, have opposed quarry proposals at an individual level over the last decade or more. But those groups and numerous others have recently joined together to form the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, aimed at a province-wide change to the aggregates industry. They're calling for an immediate moratorium on all new gravel mining approvals in Ontario to allow a pause and consultation on a new approach to balancing the need for aggregates for infrastructure with the needs of the environment. Today, we're speaking to representatives from both sides of this debate to hear the arguments both for and against the proposed moratorium. First, we are joined by Greg Sweetman. Greg has worked for James Dick Construction for 42 years, having joined the company as a teenager. Today, he is Executive Vice President of the company, and he has worked on approvals for numerous pits and quarries, some contentious, he says, and some with broad community support. In 2006, he was chairman of the Ontario Stone, Sand and Gravel Association, and he joins us as a spokesperson for the OSSGA's perspective. Then, in the second part of the episode, we're joined by two of the leaders of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, Sarah Harmer, who is well known to millions of Canadians as a platinum-selling, Juno Award-winning singer-songwriter. In 2005, she co-founded PEARL, who successfully opposed a proposed aggregate site expansion on Mount Nemo near Burlington. Graham Flint is an engineer who used to work in the oil and gravel industry in Canada's Arctic and Alberta. He later transferred to the tech industry before founding FORCE, Friends of Rural Communities and the Environment, which successfully fought a major gravel extraction proposal in Flamborough, which is today part of rural Hamilton. Welcome, Greg Sweetman, Executive Vice President of James Dick Construction. Thanks so much for joining us today to talk a bit about the gravel mining industry.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys.
Yeah, so obviously this is you're involved in big business and a business that I'm sure you'll make the arguments is required in so many sort of avenues of life with construction, housing, roads, things like this. Now, and we've got the Reform Gravel Mining Group who are asking for a moratorium on new mining. I mean, they're not saying, ban everything immediately tomorrow. They're saying, let's look at the industry. Let's see if there should be more safeguards and so on. I mean, what are your responses to that?
Well, firstly, I think it's important that people understand what we need. Like, what do we actually need to build our society, right? And what we need is high quality aggregates. For most of your listeners will understand what aggregates are. It's like the sand and stone that goes into the foundation of basically everything we build. That's not only simple things like roads and parking lots and sidewalks, but it's also skyscrapers. It's aggregates makes up about approximately 80% of the mass of concrete and asphalt. But it also is found in other parts of our lives as well. Like the paper that people write on, for example, is probably about 40% made of quarried material to give it that nice smooth finish, as opposed to a very coarse textured newsprint. I mean, people brush their teeth with it in the morning. But most importantly, it's the vast majority by tonnage is in what we use in construction. And aggregates not only allow us to shelter us, but they also keep us clean and keep us from dying of diseases. I mean, back in the early days of European settlement in southern Ontario, mean, New York was known as Muddy York. The mud was 3 feet deep in the streets. And when my Irish ancestors arrived in Toronto, about 10,000 of them died from cholera in a single year in a city with a population of about 20,000. So aggregates are what basically we use to basically build our sanitation system. When we flush the toilet in the morning, we don't think about it, but it scoots away very safely in pipes that are made of aggregate, bedded in aggregate to sewage treatment plants that are made out of aggregate. So it not only keeps us clean, allows us to transport our materials, but it also keeps our feet out of the mud. But what's interesting about aggregates is, unlike many other things in our society, we are a consumption-based industry, right? We're completely driven by consumption, and we're not so much driven by production, which means you could produce twice as much as what we do right now, and no one would buy it because nobody wants aggregate. They need aggregate, right? And if you have a 5-ton hole in your driveway, you need exactly 5 tons to fill that hole. You don't need 6 tons, and you certainly don't need 4 tons. You need exactly 5 tons. And if you have 6 tons, then that extra ton is a waste. And nobody is spraying perfume on aggregates or coloring them pink to convince people to buy more, because they just won't. If they don't need it, they won't buy it. The one example that we use to sort of illustrate the need for high quality aggregates, we always use the example of the CN Tower and the Gardiner Expressway. And the CN Tower, I was lucky enough to be president of our industry association on our 50th anniversary, and we rented the CN Tower for a day and had our big 50th anniversary party there. But we got the backstage tour with the engineers, and we said, "Look, how long is the concrete in the CN Tower going to stand up?" And they said, "Well, the concrete will last probably about 1,200 years before it really needs a serious remediation job." And if you go about 200 meters away, you have something called the Gardiner Expressway. Right? The Gardiner Expressway started falling down all by itself after about 30 years. So you ask yourself, well, what's the difference between the two? And there are some construction differences, of course. But the big difference, the 80% mass of the CN Tower, is the high quality Amabel dolomite, the highest quality aggregate we have in Ontario, whereas the Gardiner Expressway was built out of a relatively low quality aggregate. And this comes from a formation up north called the Bob Cage and the Gull River. And the Gull River in particular has layers of alkali reactivity in it. And it's alkali reactivity, not to get too technical, but it causes the concrete to kind of jack itself apart from the inside. And when you drive underneath the Gardiner, as maybe some of your listeners are right there right now, you can look for yourself. You see all that micro cracking that allows water to infiltrate. Water gets in, freeze thaw. The salt water attacks the rebar, which is uncoated, which is another construction problem with the Gardiner. And we wind up with something that falls apart. My point is that if you're building infrastructure today, what do you want to build your infrastructure out of? Do you want to build your infrastructure that build bridges that can last for hundreds of years out of the aggregates we use to build the CN Tower, or do you want to build more stuff out of the aggregates we used to build the Gardiner Expressway? So,
sorry, Greg, you're laying a lot on us right here. I'm going to be honest, and I have 100 questions that I want to ask you. So I think my first one is, I'll be honest, I didn't really consider the fact that we do need infrastructure overhaul. Like you're talking about the Gardiner, I'm thinking not just the Gardiner, but how many overpasses and sewage lines and whatnot need to be updated and maintained. Because I think when people are thinking aggregate construction, they're thinking new housing development, new apartment, new building development. But that notion of, no, we do need to reinforce existing infrastructure as well, and that needs to come from new materials, gets passed over a bit in this equation, I think. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just touch upon currently, the industry. Does the industry produce enough aggregate on existing sites to meet our infrastructure maintenance needs now? I guess that's the idea. Is how much are we actually producing on existing sites to meet what our current needs are?
Yeah, so this is the crux of it. We produce exactly how much we need, right? We ship exactly what the demand is, not a pound more, not a pound less, right? So this isn't a case where the industry says, "Hey, we're gonna open 10 new quarries and produce 20 million tons more than we did last year." No, we can only produce exactly what people will use, because it's a waste otherwise, right? So, but when you think about it, the concept of using high quality aggregates at the input level, right, It's exactly what you said. Like, so when we're replacing our existing infrastructure, why are we replacing it? Well, usually because it's falling apart. We built concrete so bad, so horrible, that we have to hire contractors to come in and rip it up into little tiny pieces, haul it to a recycling yard, and then take a $10 million bridge and crush it down into $6,000 worth of recycled aggregate. And then go into a quarry, get brand new material to build the bridge again, right? My point is, if we build the infrastructure out of the highest quality materials at the input level, then that bridge will last for 150 years instead of 50 years, right? And we only have to build it once and not 3 times. And building with high quality aggregate is an aggregate conservation strategy. So if you ask me, what do we have to build our current, do we have enough right now? I'll say we do not have enough high quality material to build our infrastructure. And to give you a case in point, like the Amabel, the high quality stuff that built the CN Tower, the town of Milton used to be the largest producing municipality in Ontario. And it quite routinely produced, around 10 million tons a year. So this year it produced 10% of what it did in the year 2000. So my point is that if we're and if you look at Halton region as a globally, it's producing 2/3 less. And that used to be almost all Amabel. There was some sand and gravel in there, but it was almost all Amabel.
If I just jump in for a second there, though, I mean,
Sure.
but isn't that because it's been mined? I mean, it's a finite resource, so that's gone, right? So, and it's not coming back, which means, I mean, that's why we see, the reclamation projects in Milton. So, saying the amounts have gone down, all we're saying there is that you've used up the resource.
You're absolutely correct. Like the aggregate industry is in the business of going out of business the day a quarry opens its gates, right? Because it's like having a hamburger restaurant with all the hamburgers you're ever going to serve frozen in your basement. And once you've served those, you got to find yourself a new restaurant, right? That's what quarrying is. Like and unlike when you build a school or a subdivision or a commercial facility, aggregate sites constantly have to renew themselves, right? We constantly have to find new places to go because every 20 or 50 years, depending on the size of your deposit, you have to basically find a new quarry, which is why, we're usually in the limelight because there's always new quarries and always will be new quarries proposed in order to replace that resource. Mm-hmm. My point is, to answer Joel's question.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry, to answer Joel's question, is the industry's effort to replace the high quality stuff, because the high quality material like the Amabel is being used up extremely rapidly, right? And we don't have enough going forward to basically source the high quality materials going forward. And that's also true for concrete sands and some of the higher end uses. So we don't have enough of the high quality material. There are pits and quarries with lower quality materials, right? And in a pinch, I guess we could use those. We could build more Gardner expressways if we really have to. But the industry is always trying to strive to build the highest quality infrastructure and produce the highest quality materials. So it's really at the high quality end that we really have a deficit in the amount of material that we can produce.
So you're going to be, far from a moratorium, we need to be opening up new mines or pits that are producing this high quality aggregate that isn't available in other places. So,
that's right.
So to bring that back to the arguments made by the Reform Gravel Mining Group, they're saying, well, you have so many. I'll just bring up the statistics here. So they've got 100 on average 157.4 million tons of gravel was extracted over the last 10 years each year, and 2.5 billion tons of gravel extraction is authorized each year. Do we not have enough from all of that? I mean, is we say, and if we've got bad mines that are producing the wrong kind of gravel, isn't that an argument to close those mines rather than keep mining them?
Well, it's kind of like, any aspect of our society. If you did an analysis about the shelf space we have to sell corn chips in the GTA, you might find, well, we have got 30 times as many shelves full of corn chips. What happens when you license a pit or a quarry? Particularly in gravel pits, you might find there's maybe 10% of the material is really high quality. You might have 30 or 40% is kind of a medium quality, and then you've got sort of a lower end material like on the Oak Ridges Marine. There's a lot of what we call blow sand pits, or that really fine sand. Now, once you've gone into that pit and taken out the high and the medium quality material, should you close it down because you just have lower quality material? Well, you can still move that, but there's still applications to move that material to. There's sand fill, there's septic beds that are being made, there's things, pipe bedding you can use that sand for. But it doesn't necessarily mean you should shut that site right down, just because instead of producing 1 million tons a year, now it's dropped its production down to 100,000 tons a year, because it's still being used up. And that company that's using that site still has the ability to generate some revenues and get some product shipping out of there. Sometimes the industry will license something and then make a business decision to hold that in reserve, because we're running out and we want to use this site over here first, and we're going to come and use that one. So it's like a strategic reserve. You think about it, like in the GTA, like we're consuming aggregates at about 3 times faster than we're replacing them.
Right.
And it just so happens that the highest quality materials we have in Ontario are in the GTA. Right? Like the Amabel is located right in the GTA. It's not located in Sudbury or somewhere way up north. It's located right here. So from a greenhouse gas perspective, like as we put more and more pressure on ourselves to reduce our carbon footprint, getting the material from immediately adjacent to the market, it just makes that much more sense.
I just want to jump in for a second there, Greg, because time is coming up. But you touched upon the greenhouse gas notion, and I think that's an excellent segue into a big criticism against the industry on part of reform gravel is the environmental impacts of these mines and pits that are opening up. I just want to give you an opportunity just kind of to address those concerns about if we're going to keep opening these mines up, there is the environmental concern of runoff of those concerns. What's your counter to that point?
So the main counter is that from a greenhouse gas perspective, the vast majority of our impact is from the transportation of the product, right? And if I have a pit in Milton or a quarry in Milton that I can drive down the road and supply growth in Milton from it, if you've been paying attention to the news, the next couple of years, we're about to get access to electric semis, right? So I have a hope in heck of delivering material using electric power if I have close to market quarries. If I have to go way up into central Ontario to bring the stuff down, there's no way I can do that. So that's a glimmer of hope we're looking at in the future. But pits and quarries are extremely clean. Like it's a physical manipulation of the material. There's not any wild and woolly chemicals used in aggregate production, and there aren't any pollution issues. In fact, we've been kicked right out of various water quality initiatives over the years, just because everyone has found that the pits and quarries are so clean. We're permitted use in most wellhead protection areas, for example. But I think if you listen very carefully to the Reform Gravel's message, what they're saying is the things we produce with gravel, they have a problem with. They don't like freeways, and their way of attacking freeways is to try to starve society off of high quality materials, right? That's crazy. You don't. If they want to attack consumption, they're more than welcome to go wild. We don't spend a nickel lobbying the government to consume more aggregates. We don't spend any advertising dollars convincing people to build more infrastructure. We just supply what is required, right? And gravel reform has an issue with the amount of things we're building. Once society decides to build something, we think you should build it out of the highest quality materials located from the closest market sources, so that you can build them so they have the greatest longevity, conserving aggregates in that process, as well as conserving greenhouse gases in the overall transportation of the materials in the first place, right? And if you have the double whammy, it adds up so that it's like 15 times more efficient from a greenhouse gas perspective to use close to market material from Halton than it is to go up to Aurelia and get crappy material that built the Carter Expressway and drive it down to build crappy infrastructure. I would much rather take it on the chin up front. Yeah, we have to go through more of a planning process in the GTA, but it's better to do that. It's better for everybody that we do that.
Okay, so push back a little bit on a couple of things you said. So you said, we don't produce more than people ask for. Now, certainly you could say the same about the oil industry. It's like, well, they only pull as much oil out of the ground as people are wanting to put into their cars. But we know that, according to the price or according to other whatever political considerations or the price of oil changes, that changes the demand. So just saying, well, we only pull out what people ask for isn't really, that doesn't mean that you're not overproducing to a huge extent. That just means that the demand is higher than it needs to be. So couldn't we argue that we are not efficient as a society? We have, over the last 50 years or more, we've built heaps of roads which just fill up with more cars, and we've sprawled into our suburbs, and we've lost farmland. And that if we no one's saying never build another house, never build another road, never build another anything, but that we be a lot more thoughtful and cautious about where we do build, to make sure that we're doing so efficiently and that we're not wasting our resources. And obviously, the place where you're saying we get the best gravel from also happens to be the best farmland in the province, and that's a finite resource as well. So, and how do you answer those kind of points that maybe you should be looking at just more efficient and more restricted ways of extraction?
So I fully recognize that we've all espoused to these noble goals of building our societies as efficiently and as sprawl-free as possible. But think about that. That generally means that what we're going to do is, instead of building more single-family detached homes with big driveways, we're going to build high-rises, right? And what that does, it switches the dial from where we can use lower quality materials in low-rise, where we need higher quality materials to build skyscrapers that are 60 stories high. So it's documented in the government's State of the Resource study they did probably 2 decades ago now. But they say, the higher we go, the higher proportion of high quality aggregates that we need. It's how can I say it? We will supply whatever the province needs us to supply, but we don't drive that from our end, right? And I'm happy that people are sort of questioning how we build and why we build and everything else. But once the decision is made to build it, then my job is to provide the highest quality materials so that we can make sure that infrastructure lasts longer, right? The argument of the coalition is, well, no, just use up the low quality stuff that's still in your pits. So we build a bunch more Gardner Expressways, right? We start using up the low quality material to build our infrastructure. And I'm saying that's wrong-headed, right? We want to build. When I'm up in our recycling yard that I can see out of my window here, I'm staring at right now, there's a big pile of broken concrete. And when I'm standing on that pile of concrete, it's getting ready to get crushed up. I can't help but to think that I'm standing on a pile of failure. I'm standing on a pile of stuff that was so bad, so horrible, we had to tear it apart and crush it up for cheap so I can recycle some cheap aggregate. I think we should leave the stuff that I'm looking at right now that was a $10 million bridge, let that continue to be a $10 million bridge by building it right the first time out of the highest quality materials the first time, right?
And I think just for one final question, because we do have to wrap it up now, but one final question, just coming from that point. I mean, isn't the argument there then that we've obviously done a pretty poor job of making sure we're using the right aggregates over the last couple of decades? So it sounds like the reform people are right. We need some more legislation to make sure we're using this stuff right, and that we're pulling the right stuff out of the ground, and not needlessly destroying things because we're trying to do things on the cheap. I mean, aren't you just making their point?
You know what? Like, I would agree with you. Like, over the last 2 decades, we've seen 3 major attempts to resupply the GTA with the highest quality material turned down. Like, we had our Rockford quarry turned down in Caledon. There was an MZO that shut down the St. Mary's quarry in Flamborough, and then Nelson crushed stone got turned down as well. So the industry is trying to resupply with the CN Tower stone. We're trying to backfill the market. But you're right, something has to change because we keep getting turned down. Now, we've had a recent success with our hidden quarry, which is a very small site. It's not a big site like the other ones. But we need to get more Amabel. And I think any rational person sort of looking at all the facts would say, yeah, we have a 10,000-year supply of Amabel in the GTA. But it's the planning approvals we need to get to it that are hard to come by, And I live in Caledon, and I go up to the Forks of the Credit, and that's an area where we can just now start to see what a quarrying area looks like after it's been sitting for 100 years, right? So those quarries were shut down around the early 1900s. They've been sitting for 100 years, and those quarries have completely faded back into the background. They're as biologically diverse as the areas around them. And the Niagara Escarpment, in their visual attractiveness study, found that as the number 1 most attractive area in the whole central portion of the Niagara Escarpment. So after 100 years, it's pretty well established that pits and quarries fade away completely. And I can take you to dozens of sites in Caledon that used to be pits and quarries you would never know if you drove by them. My point is that I'm one of those optimistic people that think that people are going to be living in southern Ontario for thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of years. I think the Europeans have demonstrated that they've had 10,000 years of quarrying going on in Europe, and it hasn't stopped them in their tracks, So we need to get along. We need to recognize that we need these materials, and it's just a matter of getting them the best way, getting them the right materials to build the right things. And as technology improves, hey, maybe we won't need aggregates. Maybe we'll have buildings that float in the air,
That'd be
as
cool.
it is right now, we're using the technology we have. Right.
Greg Sweetman, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate you doing it.
Great, it was fun. Thanks, guys.
Okay, well, welcome Sarah Harmer and Graham Flint from Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on. Yeah.
So, why don't we just sort of start off by you giving your kind of why you exist? Obviously, I think you've both probably been involved for a long time in various activism with regard to gravel mining in the 905 region. But the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition, as I understand, is a kind of new venture on this part. So perhaps you could just dive in and kind of give us why you've done this and what you're trying to achieve.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. We formally kicked off the coalition at the end of January, but that wasn't the start of the work. We've really been working on this through the sponsorship of the Wellington Water Watchers from about the middle of last year, about this time last year, actually. But the coalition was launched in January. The chief coalition partners are the Wellington Water Watchers, Environmental Defense, the Wilderness Committee, and the Council of Canadians. So those are the 4 coalition members. We're proud to be able to say we have about just under 40 community groups that have signed up. And our petition for our first campaign, which we'll talk about a little bit later, now has over 4,000 signatures. So it's been a strong launch since January, about 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks maybe now. And it's quite exciting. It's a problem that needs addressing, and we're happy to be kicking off this coalition to do so.
What exactly is the problem that you're seeing with quarry mining? It may just give us a little bit of insight onto that one.
Well, the industry has been very self-regulated and has gotten quite out of control in the last number of decades. So it's a provincially regulated industry, and we have an extreme abundance of available aggregate that's been licensed, and really a shocking amount that's been licensed way beyond, like 13 times beyond what we actually use every year, what we actually consume in the province. So we have a real stockpiling of quarry licenses, which mean that areas all across the province, it's incredible how many pits, open pit mines, and gravel quarries there are. And they're really doing a number on our prime farmland, our well water, our species at risk areas, all the best things that we need that underpin our living, our ability to kind of survive really are threatened by gravel mining. And so it's been really the problems with regulation and management of the industry by the province for the last number of decades. So that's what the coalition is here to do. It's to reform how we extract gravel, rock, all of those aggregates out of the ground in Ontario.
To put kind of the kind of arguments that I dare say the gravel mining industry would put to you, I mean, is this an attempt do you just want to stop gravel mining entirely, or is it more a matter of putting better regulation in place to make sure that mining is done appropriately when it is done?
Yeah, I mean, gravel mining is not going to go away. I mean, the roads we drive on, the buildings we live in are all composed of aggregates, gravel, as we call it colloquially. But as Sarah says, the scale of this industry has just gotten absolutely out of control. She says we have 13 times more capacity license than we actually use every year. And that 13 times leads to 5,000 acres a year of new land being licensed for the gravel industry every year. So if you go back over the last 3 decades, on average, 5,000 acres every year. And then, gravel mining is supposed to be this sort of in and out process where you extract the aggregate, the gravel, and then rehabilitate the land. But the reality is, look over the last 2 decades, there is 45% more land scarred in Ontario. So 45% more acres scarred than over the last 2 decades. It's gotten worse and worse. It's increased by that amount. And the kicker for all this is that the amount of aggregate we've actually used in the last 2 decades has actually gone down. So we used to use, from 2000 to 2010, we used on average about 168 million metric tons a year. In the last decade, 2011 to 2020, we used about 157, so it's gone down. So while the amount of gravel we actually consume and use to build our infrastructure has gone down, the scarring on the land has gone up. And all this, to jump to the punchline, comes from high-level provincial policies. As Sarah says, it's the provincial government that really is the key regulator when it comes to gravel mining. And do you know we have a policy in Ontario at the highest level of planning, a document called the Provincial Planning Statement, that has a provision in it that says there's no need to show need for a new gravel mine. So when you start at that high level point that says we don't even have to justify that we need this stuff, a gravel miner can go and open a new operation without even considering whether it's needed or not. It leads to the proliferation and the scarring of Ontario that we see.
There's a lot to unpack in that statement. We had on folks from the Gravel Association previously. A lot of what you said, they're probably going to refute. One of the statements that they were saying was the industry is pretty much, they take out just what's needed, right? Whatever the market's demanding to be used in production, that's what's taken out. A big thing they were saying is that the need for higher grade aggregate, the stuff that what was used example was the CN Tower, that stuff that's going to stand along the test of time, so to speak, as opposed to, in his words, the Gardiner Expressway, which is crumbling and falling apart. Would you refute that statement that the industry is a kind of a just-in-time industry, and that these sites are they're looking for the best grade material to develop?
Let me take the first part of it, and I'll let Sarah speak to the grade of aggregate, because I know she has some strong comments about that whole line. Let's be fair. The industry is their perspective on this is self-serving. It's their commercial enterprise. They want to be successful. When we say they have 13 times the capacity to extract aggregate, there's not huge stockpiles pulling up. It is true. They dig up a load of stone, they put it in a truck, and they ship it to a construction site. That's very true. But they're always predicting that we're going to run out of aggregate. For 5 decades now, they've been telling us we're going to run out. I have planning reports back to the 1970s and 80s that say, we're going to run out of stone, right? Well, we're 50 years later, we haven't run out of it. And what's really interesting is they're on that same bandwagon again currently. They're saying Ontario's population is going to grow. We need more aggregate to be able to, to supply that. Again, let's go back to the facts. Let's go back to the actual data. Ontario's population from the year 2000 to 2020 grew from about 12 to 15 million. So an increase of 25%. The amount of crushed stone we actually used went down in that period. We used a dense social footprint. We're building higher density. We don't need the sprawl. One of the biggest consumers of aggregate is highways and sprawl, which is a form of building that, given the climate crisis and all the other issues that we're dealing with, that we just can't, we can't continue to do that. And Sarah, do you want to speak a little bit about this special stone that we've always told that they need?
Yeah, it really, I think, speaks to the issue of waste, because there isn't a process by which the industry just targets, the Dala stone of the Niagara Escarpment, for example, like UNESCO World Biosphere, which they go into to use that gravel for, underneath your walkway or something in landscaping, whatever. That they don't differentiate between grades of gravel when it comes to using that gravel. They always say we need the best of the best. But they don't just use the best of the best for the CN Tower or the bridge building. They don't differentiate. So there's a huge amount of waste. We go into our most precious ecological areas, like the UNESCO World Biospheres, the best, most biologically rich areas in the world. And we're using that prime rock that's doing so much already to filter, for flood management, for filtering for our drinking water. And we use that in our flower beds. So in our pathways. So they can say that out of one side of their mouths, but then there really isn't the vigilance for differentiating these grades of rock and using it appropriately.
And I guess another point they would probably raise is that So, like, sure, taking things out of the land in the 905, where you also got a limited amount of farming of the kind of highest grade farming in the province, plus the World Heritage Biosphere Reserve, as you say. But against that is, well, if we don't do that, we'll have to put it on trucks and ship it from much further away, and then you're using fossil fuels and et cetera, et cetera. How do you approach that kind of argument?
There's two sides to that one. First of all, I would say as a common sense approach, it's a big, bulky, massive product. You don't want to be driving it more than you need to. But I always chuckle when I hear this, because there's another side to the gravel mining industry that we're trying to push for some improvements on, and that is on the reprocessing of aggregates. So we're not digging up and destroying green fields, but we're reusing the products that we use. I mean, for decades, we dumped a bunch of cement and aggregate product in the Leslie Street spit, right, down in downtown Toronto. We need to stop doing that, and we need to use it more. And what I find is fascinating is we get concerned about the fact that what the current state of that argument is they want permission to be able to bring the construction waste, the aggregate waste product or reclaimed product back to the rural environment. So out of the urban environment where they're tearing down these buildings, bring it back to the rural environment. And in that argument, they don't care about moving the stuff. Like it's all of a sudden putting that product on the road isn't an issue, right? We say, well, wait a minute. The only reason these things are situated where they are, as Sarah's bringing up, in some, prime agricultural land, high valued natural features in that, is because the argument is, well, the stone we need is there, but they don't seem to worry about bringing the reprocessing material back in trucks in that area. So it doesn't fly to me that it's too was there. But in a raise it up above, talking points and barbs at each other. Mm-hmm. At some point, we are going to have to solve that problem. And there are some innovative solutions, even in Canada, about that, bringing in a rail. I mean, one of the visions that have been talked about, and it's not a formal policy of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition at this point, is to try and make this decoupling the extracting of aggregate and gravel from the marketing and selling of it, so that we would create, let's say, regional depots where there'd be gravel that's collected and then shipped to the job site as a separate business opportunity. So one would be producing the products, one would be delivering the product, and we decouple this. And because you're going to have to look at different ways. Eventually, we're going to have to put it on barges and put it on rail corridors and stuff like that and move that in. So, I mean, it's right to be sensitive to a lot of trucks on the road, but let's not hide behind what is a one-sided, argument that isn't really balanced with what really happens.
I want to just switch gears a bit and allow you to comment on the moratorium on gravel mining that your organization wants to introduce into the province. Can you just give our listeners maybe a brief overview of what exactly is it that you're asking the province to implement, and give us your reasons why?
So the first campaign of the coalition is the DAMN campaign, which is DAMN, which is Demand a Moratorium Now, which basically means a pause, like a timeout on new approvals. So it doesn't mean stopping everything that's already existing, that's going on. I mean, nobody's going to lose their jobs or lose their, livelihoods. Everything's going to be status quo as far as the operations that are in place right now. But as we've talked about, there is a surplus of licensed aggregate. And so we need a timeout so that data can be shared, so that independent overview, assessment, we need, it's hard, the mining industry in Ontario, they need to say how much they've mined out of their mines. Every year they have to document how much whatever comes out of the ground. But the aggregate industry doesn't have that same obligation for some odd reason. So it's really hard to get actual facts. And that's what we need, right? We need an independent analysis to know where we're at, so that we all have the facts on the table. So that we're just calling for a pause on new approvals. And that's what the DAMN campaign, Demand a Moratorium Now, is all about.
So I just want to continue on that train of thought. Right now, the current political situation, I guess, in the province, we just recently had the Housing Affordability Task Force release their study, and they're talking about we need to build more housing, livable housing for people in this province to meet the demand. which is a very real. It's a separate issue, but it's a very real issue that I think does tie into the aggregate issue as well. We're talking about trying to build denser cities, denser neighborhoods, and we had Greg from this Gravel Association talk about like building condo and apartment buildings requires aggregate, a large amount of aggregate. Are we not? If we go forward with this moratorium and pause any future sites, are we not risk maybe shooting ourselves in the foot of not meeting that demand and not being able to meet those targets to find places for people to live?
We better not, because it's a real issue, right? I mean, that's one thing that we would, I think we have some commonality with the aggregate industry about that. Mass transit needs to be built, and that'll take crushed stone as well. But when you consider the I don't know, the decades old stereotypical, big expressway leading to big, roadways and parkways, which lead to big parking lots and big box malls and lots of independent homes on winding roads. Like that takes a huge amount of aggregate. I'm not a planner. I'm not a civil engineer, but I've been told by smart people that well, here's a statistic. When Sarah and I first got into this in the early 2000s, the ministry would tell us that each of us, as a resident of Ontario, use 15 to 16 tons of aggregate every year. I don't know where Sarah put hers. I always had trouble finding where mine was going, but but that was the average. That average now has dropped down to 10. So we're using a third less aggregate per person than we did before. So the denser build formats, I believe, and smart people who understand this stuff tell me, will use less aggregate, not more. So it is true, we need it to go up. But I think when you look at all the sprawl characteristics, the highways that lead to boulevards and parkways, which lead to parking lots and roads, we will use less aggregate at the end of the day. We don't, like the coalition is not trying to somehow impact the important things we need to do as a society. What we've got is an industry that's out of control. One of the things we haven't mentioned yet is these dormant sites. I mean, the Acton story is an incredible story where they, huge operation up in Acton, wanted to expand it. It was a 7 or 8 year fight that overlapped a little bit with the fights that Sarah and I were first involved in. Got approvals, mined it for a couple years, and then just mothballed it. We call them dormant sites. So it's, the natural environment, all that stuff that we should care about has been destroyed. It's a scar in the community, a scar on the landscape, but because market conditions don't favor them taking rock from that location, it just sits there open. I mean, talk about a clear example of why we have too much capacity in the system. We don't need more capacity. And, that's the other thing. As Sarah was very clear, we're not taking anything away. If they're licensed and they've got all the permissions they need to operate, we're not saying that they should be impacted in some way. It's the rallying cry of the climate crisis response. The first thing you do in a crisis is stop making it worse. And issuing new gravel license just makes it worse. So we're just saying stop making it worse.
And I mean, I was just thinking, obviously in Burlington, just the one I'm familiar with is the local quarry here kind of having licenses which were agreed literally decades ago that they're now bringing in now. In the meantime, of course, housing estates have been put up, which are neighboring them. And it's an interesting point that this thing can, licenses which were granted so long ago can suddenly come out, come out of the woodwork, so to speak. Now, I guess the other question, that you need to address is the current kind of political climate with the provincial government, which is, I don't think even they would deny that they're pro-development and also pro-road. Do you kind of look at that and go, what hope do we have with these guys, or do you think you can make real headway with this provincial government?
Well, we can go into that quite deeply. I guess looking at 37% of the Ontario population who voted for this government. So our first past the post, electoral system is faulty from the beginning. But yeah, there is an election June this year, and we have gone back in time. It has been a regressive on many fronts provincial government, and on the aggregate file, we can't continue to use this industrial growth model. It has gotten us into some real predicaments. And so this is some foundational stuff that needs to be on better footing here. And I would say that most people understand the limits that are just naturally in place and how we have to do better. And when you really start to uncover the way that this industry has been allowed by both, not just this government provincially, but previous governments as well haven't done a good enough job in regulating and managing this common resource, right? So this is Ontario belongs to everybody in a way that we all have to do better, and that's what we're calling for is just bringing things up to current levels as much as anything.
And Roland, if I could just add that there's a classic conflict of interest on the table here, because the biggest consumer of gravel products are the municipal and provincial governments. So they are in a business relationship with each other, and that's why one of the details of our dam campaign for the moratorium is that the independent panel we want convened is truly independent. It's run as an independent commission with all the transparency that those types of venues provide. Because the government, when I've been in the room with government and industry, I can hear industry saying, "Oh, that's going to cost more. Oh, that might cut down the amount of supply that we have." And I can see the fear in our elected officials because they have a responsibility to build the roads and the bridges and the hospitals that we need. And to me, the only way to break that inherent sort of too close from comfort relationship is to shine some light on it, is to make the transactions and the decisions more visible. And that's why we need some independent overview. And as Sarah says, it's been a success of governments that hasn't dealt with this issue. This issue has been going on for decades, and no government has really moved the needle very far in the right direction. And this government's actually moved it in the wrong direction.
And that's. I was pointing a finger at the current one, but I certainly take the point about it wasn't like things were hugely different under previous ones. I mean, have you had any conversations with the parties, the opposition parties who, are obviously hoping to form a government after June? Are you getting any kind of positive hearing from them?
Well, on our January 25th launch, we're really proud to say we had Mike Schreiner from the Greens and Sandy Shaw from the NDP on the launch event with us, declaring that if they were to form a government, they would move forward with a moratorium. They were fully supportive of it. We had Lucie Coulard from the Liberals on there. I think she heard a lot. She's been very empathetic about the issue in that they've agreed to look at this, and they've led us to believe we won't be disappointed when we see their platform. But I can't announce what they're going to do because they haven't announced anything yet. But I'm optimistic. And I will say, and I want to say this because this is factual. It's not just partisanship by any means. When this current government got in, we started the gravel aggregate file with them holding what we call the secret summit. They had a summit to look at doing things on the aggregate file, and it was the first time Prior to joining the coalition, I worked 6 years with an organization called Gravel Watch Ontario, and we had been brought in to the government as a stakeholder, throughout those years. They had this secret summit that was industry only, and we weren't even allowed at the table. And why I call it the secret summit? It was the most bizarre thing I'd experienced in politics thus far. Is they wouldn't even tell the attendees of the event until 48 hours before where the venue was, because I guess they were scared that we would show up with pitchforks and placards or something like that. But that's why I call it the secret summit. So it's nothing. We've reached out since the coalition has launched several times. We have some relationships with some of the good men and women that work within the ministry, the good government employees that are related, involved in this issue. We've had some dialogue with them, but we have not been able to talk to anyone at Queen's Park. Absolutely no one.
Oh, well, that's a story that we sympathize with. We've been trying to have a number of cabinet ministers and top dogs in the government onto this podcast, but no one returns our phone calls. I see that we're coming up on our time limit, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to call this conversation short. But I do think we could, as it's a common phrase in this podcast, we could talk about this for hours. So I suspect we won't be hearing the last from you, Graham, and you, Sarah, on this matter. And I guess we'll leave the door open to you to come back and give us a follow up and maybe an update somewhere down the road on what's happening on the file. But I'd like to thank both Graham Flint and Sarah Harmer for coming onto the podcast today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
that's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.